Looks like they are scraping the bottom of the barrel for guest instructors now. The words carried across the firing range with deliberate cruelty. Cadet Jackson, barely 3 months into his training, stood with his arms crossed, a sneer fixed on his face as he watched the elderly man shuffle toward the shooting stations. His buddies snickered, feeding off his bravado like wolves scenting weakness. The old man, Thomas Garrett, moved slowly across the sun-scorched ground. At 76, his body bore the weight of decades, his gait unsteady, his frame bent slightly forward as if leaning into an invisible wind. He carried a battered rifle case, the canvas worn thin in places, patched with tape that had yellowed with age. His clothes were simple, faded jeans, a plain flannel shirt, and boots that had seen better years. To the gathered cadets, he looked like someone's grandfather who had wandered onto the base by mistake. "Instructor Davis," Jackson called out, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Are we running a training program or a nursing home field trip?" Instructor Mark Davis turned, his jaw tightening. He was a career NCO, a man who prided himself on running a tight ship, and this civilian addition to his training roster was an unwelcome complication. The base commander had personally requested that Thomas be allowed to observe and, if willing, participate in the advanced marksmanship training. Davis had pushed back, citing safety protocols and the disruption to his carefully planned schedule. But orders were orders. "That's enough, Cadet," Davis said, though his tone suggested he didn't entirely disagree. He approached Thomas with the carefully controlled patience of someone performing an irritating obligation. "So, I appreciate you taking the time to visit our facility. However, I should inform you that this is an advanced tactical marksmanship course. The distances we're working with today exceed 1,000 meters. The equipment is highly specialized, and the physical demands are considerable." The implication hung heavy in the desert air. This wasn't a place for old men. This was a proving ground for warriors. Thomas said nothing. He simply set his case down on a wooden bench, the movement careful and deliberate. His hands, marked with age spots and old scars, worked the clasps with surprising steadiness. The case opened to reveal a rifle that drew immediate attention, not for its modernity, but for its apparent antiquity. "Jesus, is that a relic from World War II?" another cadet whispered, though not quietly enough. "Probably from the Civil War," Jackson shot back, drawing another round of laughter. The rifle was indeed old, a modified Springfield M1A, its wooden stock darkened by years of handling, the metal showing where that no amount of oil could hide. It looked fragile, outdated, a museum piece that had no business on a range filled with cutting-edge precision rifles worth more than most cars. Davis examined the rifle with barely concealed disdain. "Sir, with all due respect, our standard equipment." "I'll use my own, thank you," Thomas said. His voice was quiet, gravelly from age, but there was something beneath it. Not defiance, exactly, just certainty. The instructor's expression hardened. This was becoming a problem. He had 16 cadets who needed to qualify today, a tight schedule to maintain, and now this stubborn old man was going to waste everyone's time with his antique. Fine, let him take a shot, miss badly, and then they could all move on with their day. "All right," Davis said, gesturing toward the firing line. "Lane 7 is open. Target at 1,200 meters. That's the hostile with hostage scenario. Center mass on the threat without hitting the civilian silhouette positioned 6 inches to the left. Wind is variable, gusting 8 to 12 miles per hour from the northeast. Mirage is significant due to ground temperature." He paused, letting the technical complexities sink in. "Do you need assistance setting up, so?" "I'll manage," Thomas replied. As Thomas made his way to Lane 7, the cadets formed a loose semicircle behind the firing line. This had become entertainment, a break from the grinding pressure of qualification. They watched him move, noting every shuffle, every careful step, confirming their assessment. He was frail, past his prime, completely out of his depth. Jackson leaned toward his friend Ramirez. $20 says he can't even see the target, let alone hit it. "I'm not taking that bet," Ramirez whispered back. "That's basically stealing." Thomas lowered himself to the prone position, and the movement was not smooth. His knees creaked audibly, and he had to brace himself with one hand to avoid toppling over. Several cadets exchanged knowing glances. This was painful to watch. Davis stood behind him, arms folded, his expression a mixture of impatience and something approaching pity. He'd seen this before, veterans who couldn't let go, who needed to prove something to themselves or others, who didn't realize that their time had passed. It was sad, really. He made a mental note to have a word with whoever had approved this visit. Some traditions needed to stay in the past. "Sir, you'll need a spotter for a shot at this distance," Davis said, his voice taking on the exaggerated patience one might use with a confused elderly relative. "The calculations alone." "No spotter," Thomas said, his eye now pressed to his scope. A few of the cadets laughed outright at this. Shooting at 1,200 meters without a spotter was either supreme confidence or complete ignorance. Given the man's age and equipment, they knew which it was. Thomas lay motionless on the firing line, his breathing slowing to something that seemed to barely qualify as alive. His weathered cheek rested against the stock of his rifle, his eye fixed to the scope. To the watching cadets, he looked like he might have fallen asleep. Several of them shifted restlessly. How long was this going to take? Jackson, emboldened by the lack of response to his previous mockery, stepped closer. "Hey, Gramps, you need us to put the target closer. Maybe paint it bright orange." A ripple of laughter moved through the group. Even Davis, though he made a half-hearted gesture for quiet, allowed a smirk to touch his lips. The situation had moved beyond simple disrespect into outright ridicule, and he was doing nothing to stop it. "Perhaps," Davis said, addressing Thomas but speaking loudly enough for all to hear, "this would be a good opportunity for you to observe our cadets instead. Sometimes watching the next generation work is reward enough." It was a polite ejection disguised as an offer, a face-saving exit for an old man who had overestimated his capabilities. Thomas didn't respond. He didn't move. His entire existence seemed to have narrowed to the tunnel of his scope, to the shimmering heat waves downrange, to the impossible distance between him and a target most of these cadets had been training for months to hit. As the mockery continued behind him, something shifted in Thomas's awareness. The desert around him dissolved, replaced by a different heat, a different kind of danger. The sand beneath his prone form became red clay and sparse vegetation. The distant target became a window in a compound half a mile away, where intelligence had placed a high-value target. The year was 1971. The country was Laos, and Thomas Garrett was not an old man, but a Marine Scout sniper, 24 years old and responsible for the lives of the reconnaissance team hidden in the jungle behind him. That day, Thomas had lain motionless for 7 hours, waiting for a single moment. His spotter, a kid named Martinez from San Diego, had whispered corrections in his ear, reading the wind through the jungle canopy, calculating angles that seemed impossible. When the shot came, it was over before anyone in the compound knew death had arrived. One trigger pull, one life ended, 6 lives saved. Martinez had been killed 2 weeks later by a landmine. Thomas had carried his dog tags for 3 years before he could finally bring himself to send them to Martinez's mother. He never told her that her son had died saving his life, throwing himself forward when he'd spotted the tripwire Thomas was about to cross. The memory lasted only a heartbeat, a ghost of the past that flickered through him like heat lightning. But it steadied him, reminded him of what he'd learned in places these boys couldn't imagine. That stillness was a weapon. That patience was armor. That the loudest voice on the range was rarely the one that mattered when the bullet left the chamber. Unknown to the drama playing out on the firing line, a different scene was unfolding in the base commander's office 2 miles away. Colonel Patricia Hayes was in the middle of a conference call when her aide knocked urgently on her door, his face pale. She muted the call, irritation flashing across her features. "This better be critical, Lieutenant. I just received a call from the range. There's a civilian there, and I think we might have a serious problem." "What kind of problem?" The lieutenant swallowed hard. The duty officer just ran the visitor log. The name Thomas Garrett was flagged in the system. I pulled his file. He handed her a tablet, his hands trembling slightly. "Colonel is not just a veteran." Hayes took the tablet, her eyes scanning the screen. As she read, the color drained from her face. The file was heavily redacted, full of black bars and classified stamps, but what remained was enough. Multiple tours in Vietnam. Marine Scout Sniper. Over 90 confirmed kills. Silver Star. 2 bronze stars with Valor. A purple heart with 3 oak leaf clusters. And at the bottom, a notation in red that made her blood run cold. Presidential Security Clearance, TSOSCI, compartmented operations. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Who's the range instructor today?" "Instructor Davis." Hayes was already on her feet, grabbing her cover from its stand. "Get my car. Now, and call ahead. I want every senior officer on that range before I arrive." She paused at the door, turning back to her aide. "And pray to whatever God you believe in that Davis has been treating this man with the respect he deserves." The aide's expression suggested he had doubts about that prayer being answered. Back on the range, Instructor Davis's patience had run out completely. He stepped forward, his voice taking on an edge of command. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to clear the firing line. You've had ample time to prepare, and we have a schedule to maintain. If you are unable to take the shot, I need you to vacate the lane so my cadets can continue their qualification." Jackson saw an opportunity to twist the knife. "Maybe we should call someone to come pick him up," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I mean, if he's having this much trouble remembering how to shoot, what else might he be forgetting? Could be a safety issue." It was a calculated cruelty, the suggestion that Thomas might be suffering from dementia, that he was not just incompetent but mentally impaired. Several of the cadets looked uncomfortable now, sensing that the mockery had crossed a line into something uglier. But no one spoke up. No one challenged Jackson or the instructor who stood by, allowing it all to happen. Thomas's finger moved to the trigger. The pressure was light, familiar, a lover's touch on steel. And then, cutting through the tension like a blade, came the sound of vehicles approaching at high speed. The distinctive growl of military transport engines pushed to their limit, accompanied by the sharp whoop of sirens, shattered the hot afternoon air. Every head except Thomas's turned toward the access road. A convoy materialized through the shimmering heat. 3 vehicles, moving in tight formation, throwing up rooster tails of dust. The lead vehicle, a command Humvee with the base commander's flag mounted on its antenna, skidded to a halt 30 yards from the firing line. Before it had fully stopped, Colonel Hayes erupted from the passenger's seat, moving with an intensity that froze every person on the range. Behind her, 2 more vehicles disgorged a full complement of base senior staff, the operations officer, the sergeant major, and half a dozen others whose rank and bearing suggested this was not a routine visit. The expressions on their faces ranged from concern to barely suppressed panic. Instructor Davis snapped to attention, utterly bewildered. "Colonel on the range," he barked, and the cadets scrambled to form up, their mockery forgotten in the face of unexpected command presence. Colonel Hayes ignored him entirely. Her eyes scanned the firing line until they found what she was looking for, the elderly man in the worn flannel shirt, still prone in lane 7, still motionless, still focused on his target 1,200 meters downrange. She walked directly toward him, her stride long and purposeful. The sergeant major, a bay of a man named Rodriguez who'd served for 28 years, fell in step behind her. As they approached Thomas's position, both officers came to attention. And then Colonel Hayes did something that would be talked about on that base for years to come. She rendered a salute. A full, crisp, holding nothing back salute to a man lying on the ground in civilian clothes. "Marine Scout Sniper Thomas Garrett," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent range. "On behalf of this command, it is my honor to welcome you to this facility, sir." In that moment, as those words hung in the air, Thomas Garrett squeezed the trigger. The shot that followed was not the sharp crack of the modern rifles these cadets had trained with. It was a deeper report, a thunderous boom that seemed to roll across the desert like the voice of something ancient and terrible. The sound had barely faded when, 1,200 meters downrange, the center mass of the hostile target, a space no larger than a playing card, exploded in a spray of paper and cardboard. The civilian silhouette 6 inches to the left stood untouched. The precision was absolute. The shot was impossible. and Thomas Garrett worked the bolt of his old rifle as casually as a man swatting a fly, the brass casing ejecting to land in the dust beside him. Colonel Hayes held her salute until Thomas, moving with the slow deliberation of age, pushed himself up from the prone position and returned it. When their hands dropped, the colonel did something else that defied all standard military protocol. She offered her hand not as a superior, but as an equal. "So," she said, and her voice trembled slightly with emotion, "I cannot apologize enough for what you've encountered here today. Had I known you were on this installation." "It's all right, Colonel," Thomas said quietly. "No harm done." But Hayes turned from him to face Instructor Davis and the assembled cadets, and her expression transformed from respect to cold fury. "No harm done," she repeated, her voice rising. "No harm done." She took a step toward Davis, who seemed to shrink before her. "Instructor Davis, do you have any idea who you've been speaking to? Do any of you?" The silence was absolute. "This man," Hayes continued, her voice now carrying the full weight of command, "is not just a veteran. Thomas Garrett served 3 tours in Vietnam as a Marine Scout sniper. He holds the 5th longest confirmed kill in Marine Corps history. He operated behind enemy lines for weeks at a time, providing reconnaissance and target elimination for operations that are still classified. He turned down a promotion to officer 3 times because it would have taken him off the line, away from his team." She paused, letting that sink in. "The rifle you mocked is the same weapon he carried through the jungles of Southeast Asia. That antique has more confirmed kills than every person on this range combined will make in their entire careers." Sergeant Major Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice like gravel. "Mr. Garrett didn't just serve. He defined what it meant to be a scout sniper. The techniques we teach now, the standards we hold, they exist because of men like him. He's not visiting our facility. We're standing in his house. We're the guests, hey." Thomas raised a hand, his expression uncomfortable. "That's enough. I came here to observe, maybe offer some thoughts to the next generation. I didn't come for speeches." But Hayes wasn't finished. She turned to Cadet Jackson, who had gone pale as paper. "You, front and center." Jackson stumbled forward, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "What did you call this man earlier? Think carefully about your answer." Jackson's mouth opened and closed. No words came. "I'll tell you what you called him," Hayes said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You called him Gramps. You suggested he belonged in a nursing home. You mocked his equipment, his age, his presence, hey. And you did it loudly, proudly, assuming your ignorance gave you the right." She stepped so close to Jackson that their faces were inches apart. "You're recycled. Effective immediately. You'll start training over from day 1, and you will not advance until you can demonstrate that you understand what honor and respect mean. Do you understand me?" "Yes," Jackson managed, his voice barely a whisper. Hayes turned to Davis. "And you, instructor, your failure here today is worse than his. You're senior. You set the tone. You had the responsibility to protect a guest on this installation, and instead, you participated in his humiliation. You're relieved of your training duties pending a full review." Davis's face crumpled. "Colonel, I don't want to hear it," Hayes snapped. "Get off my range. Now." As Davis and Jackson walked away, their humiliation complete, Hayes turned back to Thomas. Her fury melted into something approaching reverence. "So, I hope you'll allow us to show you the proper respect. I'd like to invite you to address the entire training command. Your experience, your knowledge, these kids need to hear from you. Really hear from you." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, looking at the gathered cadets. Most of them couldn't meet his eyes, shame radiating from every line of their bodies. But a few, Ramirez among them, looked at him with something new in their faces. Not fear, exactly. "Or, Colonel," Thomas said finally, "I'll stay on one condition. Those boys don't get punished anymore. They're young. They made a mistake. Let it be a lesson, not a career ender." Hayes looked surprised. "Sir, they disrespected you." "They disrespected an old man they didn't know," Thomas corrected gently. "Now they know different. That's punishment enough." He looked directly at Jackson, who stood 30 yards away, his shoulders slumped. The hardest shots you'll ever make won't be at distant targets. They'll be the choices you make when no one's watching, when you have to decide what kind of man you want to be. His words settled over the range like morning dew, quiet and complete. In the weeks that followed, the incident became legend on the base. Thomas Garrett returned, not as a guest, but as an honored instructor, teaching a voluntary course on field craft and precision shooting. 30 cadets signed up. 60 showed up. They sat in silence as he spoke, not about glory or heroism, but about responsibility and the weight of taking a life, even in war. Cadet Jackson was among them, sitting in the front row, taking notes with an intensity that bordered on desperation. He didn't speak much, but he listened to every word. 6 months later, Thomas was at a coffee shop near his home when someone sat down across from him. It was Jackson, his hair longer now, his face changed by months of reflection and rededication. "Sir," Jackson said, and his voice was different, humbled, genuine. "I just graduated, top of my class, and I wanted you to know that I carry that lesson from the range with me every day. You saved me from becoming someone I would have hated." Thomas looked at the young man, saw the growth, the change, and nodded slowly. "The fact that you came here tells me everything I need to know about who you've become. Make me proud, son." "I will, sir. I promise." As Jackson left, Thomas sat alone with his coffee, watching the morning traffic pass. He thought of Martinez, of all the young faces he'd known who never got the chance to grow old, to learn from their mistakes, to become better. And he thought that maybe, just maybe, his visit to that range had done something those long-ago battles never could. Pass the torch to a generation that would honor what it meant to be a warrior, not just in skill, but in spirit. Thank you for watching this story from True Valor Veteran. If Thomas Garrett's quiet dignity and powerful lesson moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of real heroes who walk among us. Your support ensures these stories continue to be told.